With the release of Spider-Man 2, life was good for Sony Pictures and the team behind the movie.
Academy Award for Best Visual Effects.
John Dykstra, Scott Stoke-Dyke, Anthony Lamolinaire for Spider-Man 2.
Spider-Man 2 had been a roaring success.
Huge moneymaker.
Now it was full speed ahead with the third installment.
People were excited by it.
But a power play from Marvel.
CEO capitulated to Marvel and renegotiated the deal. They had more rights and more say.
Demanding a new character.
He's this, alien symbiote.
Essentially, it's like the evil version of Spider-Man.
Threatened to derail the production.
Venom was just not a character that he felt any connection to.
A changing of the guard with crew.
They didn't want me.
Infighting.
They will stomp up and down on your throat until your eyes pop out and you're spewing vomit to get what they want.
And a script that never seemed finished.
None of this was ever really figured out.
Made the production of Spider-Man 3 the most chaotic yet.
The hardest thing I've ever done in my career, before or since.
Would it show on the screen?
There was this feeling the film was dissimilar from the two films before it.
Or achieve box office glory?
Doing a third one, you're kind of pushing your luck,
Following the success of Spider-Man 2, Sony could have cruised into the development of Spider-Man 3, but instead decided to shift gears.
Coming off of the film that people are saying is one of the best comic book movies of all time.
Your father would be so proud.
Making a ton of money at the box office gave Sony the ability to essentially keep the foot on the gas pedal.
Thanks for the good news.
Not just keep it on, but push the pedal to the metal.
Sony wanted to do 2 films back-to-back to shoot parts 3 and 4 together.
I think at that point in time, Lord of the Rings was in process of shooting the last 2 films together.
Actually, all 3 films, but that's another story.
So that was a really big step forward.
They can cut down on costs by shooting both of them together on the sets that you need and keeping the creative team together for as long as you could. And also, you utilize the actors really quickly.
Especially with the further we get into effects, the longer these things take, so you maybe want to get your shooting out of the way.
And just take as much time as you needed in post-production to put them together and to release them when you needed to.
While the storylines for both films were by no means worked out, Sam Raimi did know one thing.
It involved the Vulture,
Sandman.
And to top that off, Harry Osborn's Green Goblin.
Sam genuinely only likes those characters from the 60s, from when he was a kid, the villains that Steve Ditko created.
Which is why he used Dr. Octopus, why he used Green Goblin.
For the role of the Vulture, Sam Raimi was hoping to swoop down and pluck up Ben Kingsley.
He played this really villainous character in a film called Sexy Beast, and I think that changed a lot of people's perception of him, from Mahatma Gandhi to this guy could play a villain.
Perfect casting. He's got the same cranium as the Vulture, and he's a great actor.
However, it wasn't to be, because big changes were afoot at Sony.
New CEO was brought into Sony Pictures.
And the new CEO would be inheriting that years-long, ongoing lawsuit with Marvel.
After the success of Spider-Man, Marvel sued us because they wanted more of the money.
But Sony's new CEO had had enough.
That CEO capitulated to Marvel and renegotiated the deal. I mean, it was a big shift in terms of Sony controlling the movie.
A shift so large, it handed back creative power to Marvel.
When there was a corporate change at Sony granting Marvel more power at the creative table.
They had more rights and more say.
And say they did, saying,
"We want Venom in the film."
Venom?
He's this, alien symbiote.
Essentially, it's like the evil version of Spider-Man.
But why Venom? Well, that's an interesting story. And the main character in it...
A producer by the name of Avi Arad.
That's right, Avi Arad. Marvel's number 2 came from a toy background, but he's also so much more.
He was smart, he was a deal maker, but he was also cunning.
Avi Arad knew that Venom, at this point, was becoming an extremely popular character in Spider-Man mythology, particularly in the comic books.
And after Venom's appearance in the animated series, Avi Arad had proof.
Venom toys sold like crazy, so he just figured if he could get him into live action somehow, it was instantly going to make Spider-Man 3 one of the more profitable chapters in the saga.
Venom was made for toys, literally. Back in the 1980s, with comic books in decline,
Marvel made a deal with a toy company. They did a mini-series called Secret Wars as a sort of promotional comic where all of the characters who would be featured were going to be toys, basically.
In issue 8, Peter Parker debuted a new black suit that was very popular. The toy sales were fantastic. And the look stuck until Todd McFarlane showed up.
That would be this Todd McFarlane.
They said, you can jump on Amazing Spider-Man. Oh, super cool. ... Peter Parker in the comic book was wearing a black costume. I'm like, that's not Spider-Man. Spider-Man's red and blue. He's got the webs on him. And they're going, no, this is how he is and we like it. And I'm like, well, I don't want to draw it then.
So Todd came up with a way to satisfy his own tastes and his boss's.
What if we keep the black costume? I just sort of create another character with the black costume. Then we can put Peter Parker back into the classic. The result of that is Venom.
Perfect. Now all they needed was a backstory to justify Venom's existence.
Peter Parker goes to another planet and he gets his suit torn up and he puts on this alien suit that gets made for him, and little does he know that it's a symbiote that can kind of take over him and his mind, and he comes back and he gets rid of it and Eddie winds up with it on and he becomes Venom.
And well, Todd's instincts proved a master stroke.
Lo and behold, for whatever reason, Venom took off and I ended up taking it to the top of the charts. Venom was the new bad guy. He sort of superseded Green Goblin, basically jumped and became the king. That was Avi going, let's go with the hip new stuff.
A category you could say that Avi Arad didn't see the Sandman or the Vulture fitting into.
Sandman. He's one of those characters, if done right, their powers can be impressive. If done wrong, they can seem goofy.
And Sam Raimi was cooking up a unique spin on the character.
The monsters we care the most for are the ones that are riddled with tragedy.
Flint Marko's story, where he's this criminal who needs to steal enough money in order to get back in the good graces of his family, and you can see these sort of sympathetic elements that are built into his character.
The Vulture is one of those villains that you could look at and go, what the? Because he's an old man, bald guy, even lost his hair, and he's in some kind of flamboyant costume.
However, the Vulture's perceived weakness was also his greatest strength.
The thing about a character like the Vulture, age actually matters. When you're young, you're a warrior. And as you get older, you become like a chess master.
But in Marvel's mind, they wanted to break records. The only thing the Vulture looked like breaking was his hip.
It's just the reality of the movie business. I mean, you have financial people and executives, and then you have creative people, and they're always butting heads.
That butting of heads left Sam Raimi questioning his desire to remain with the project.
Directing one of those films is a massive endeavor and requires a huge amount of emotional commitment.
An emotional commitment Sam Raimi felt he didn't have with Venom in the film.
Between 2 and 3, there was a lot of reconsidering, and there was a question of whether we would hire a different director. We all really wanted Sam to stay. I don't think anybody really was, rooting for a replacement.
But if Sam didn't concede to Marvel's demands, that the Vulture was out and Venom was in, then Sam would be out too.
And this goes back to Avi's instincts as a toy maker. I think he realized he could all of a sudden sell a whole range of toys of Spider-Man in a new costume.
Sam understood that it's all about money because it's a business now. It's not as much of an art form. Us creatives are still trying to fight for the art. Studios are fighting for the money.
But also just Sam loved Spider-Man, and he was a Spider-Man fan. And it was very important to him.
And he relented.
Making the pill even more bitter to swallow. The Vulture had had his wings clipped.
They thought the Vulture with Goblin, the Sandman, and Venom, they're like, oh, that's gonna be too much. Maybe we'll save it for 4.
I remember him being bummed out that he didn't get to use Vulture. I think they tried to bring him in for Spider-Man 2 also and weren't able to do it.
With the Vulture out and Venom in, would Sam continue with the same burning passion he had for the previous 2 films?
The bottom line is if you're gonna pay millions of dollars to make your own movie, you can do whatever the hell you want. But if you're gonna take somebody else's money, you have to factor that in and you have to consider their position.
But what would that cost be to the film itself? Meanwhile, the lead actors in the film were experiencing a little Venom of their own.
There was a lot of focus group research that people didn't like Kirsten Dunst.
They hated me.
Well, they can't hate you.
And there was a lot of talk about recasting Kirsten.
There was also speculation. Did Kirsten even want to come back?
I don't know if this is gossip or what, but at the time, Toby, him and Kirsten, both, they kind of butted heads.
The third installment of the Spider-Man franchise had gotten off to the rockiest of starts. Studio negotiations first, followed by disagreements over the direction of the film's story and characters, culminated in Sam Raimi being
told to use Venom as the main bad guy.
Venom was going to be in it whether or not Sam wanted him there.
a character he didn't identify with.
There's a joy that he has. It's baked into everything that he does. And I just don't feel like Venom was a character that he had any connection to.
Complicating matters, Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst didn't seem to be getting along.
Can't get off if you don't get on, Peter.
I don't think it's that simple.
I think he might have been dating Kirsten for a stretch.
You complicate things.
At some point, they said, well, I'm not going to do it if she's going to be on the movie, and I'm not going to do it if he's going to be on the movie.
Tobey, not the greatest guy. Kind of a prick. Yeah, I don't think I could say anything usable about Tobey.
So, with Kirsten's involvement up in the air, producers decided to bring in another love interest for Peter Parker, Gwen Stacy.
In the comics, Gwen Stacy was like Betty from Archie Comics. So Peter Parker, MJ, and Gwen, then you got Archie, Betty, and Veronica, kind of like a triumvirate. And you've got two girls pulling for his attention, and he's really conflicted.
While Mary Jane and Peter Parker were sort of an opposites attract kind of couple, Gwen was very similar to Peter. She was book smart and she loved science.
Elisha Cuthbert and Scarlett Johansson were both considered. However, Bryce Dallas Howard won the role thanks to her performance in several M. Night Shyamalan films.
I think she's a terrific actress, and when she gets the opportunity to do more dramatic work, she's generally fantastic.
That being said, there was an issue with the role.
In the comics, she's supposed to die at the hands of the Green Goblin.
One of the most important comic book events of all time is the death of Gwen Stacy.
5 years after her first appearance, the night that Gwen Stacy died hit stands.
The Green Goblin, knowing how much she meant to Peter, threw her off the Brooklyn Bridge, and he was unable to save her.
When he tries to save her and the web breaks her neck, he blades himself for everything, so that's part of the curse of Spider-Man.
Fans never saw it coming.
I was in 8th grade, I think it was, and I'm reading Spider-Man, I'm like,
You don't expect a company to kill off one of its major characters.
I think today is still one of the big moments in comic book folklore.
It had also been one of the big moments in Spider-Man 1.
But with Mary Jane, he'd essentially played that sequence beat for beat with Mary Jane.
Which created a dilemma.
Because, you know, Toby and Kirsten had kind of worked out their issues, and more importantly, Sam Raimi had refused to recast Kirsten.
Held his ground on Kirsten Dunst.
So now we have both of them in this movie, Gwen Stacy and MJ. What could go wrong?
And over the course of the movie, she's like a student in Peter's class, and then she's a fashion model at the crane sequence, and then she's somebody who has enough power to preside over a hero parade that they're having for Spider-Man. She's all over the place in terms of characterization.
When it came to choosing who'd play the film's other characters, for the role of Sandman, actor Thomas Hayden Church was the producer's one and only choice, more known for his comedy chops.
I liked him as the doofus on Wings.
That's the last time I store the brake fluid next to the Dr. Pepper.
I didn't think I would take him as seriously as the supervillain in the comic book.
But it was his turn in Sideways that gave producers hope he could pull off the role.
Why don't we go back to my place?
Yeah.
I had done Sideways with him. So I had a great, working relationship with Thomas Hayden Church. And when he came on, I thought, it was perfect casting for Sandman.
The funny thing about Thomas Hayden Church is that he looks so much like Flint Marko that when they got him, it was like, well, of course, you have to essentially get him. He's built to play that part.
Casting the role of Venom, though, was a much bigger job. Literally.
In the comic book, Venom is large. And so probably if I were going to the movie casting, I would have probably leaned more toward Dwayne Johnson.
But instead, Sam Raimi cast Topher Grace?
Sure, he just, you know, he looks kind of more like a Peter Parker and less more like the Venom that we know and love. You know, big.
There's nothing about Topher Grace that says Eddie Brock at all.
He's a nice guy.
A terrible casting. But you know, that wasn't an accident. If Sam Raimi had to do Venom, he wanted to do it on his own terms.
While the main casting was complete, a script was not.
I came onto the movie like a year into pre-production. They were still planning on making 2 movies, that there would be a cliffhanger at the end of Spider-Man 3, and then Spider-Man 4 would play out the rest of the story.
But without much of a script, there weren't many storyboards.
Sam has a whole group of people around him that, you know, that work on crafting these things. They'd worked on one sequence, basically. It was the scene where Peter is grabbed off of his bike by Harry early on in the movie. They were really enjoying all of that, but 30 minutes long. It was, you know, and I like to accomplish things. So, you know, I was put in charge of a group of previs animators.
Prevising anything from the still incomplete script that they could get their hands on.
The subway fight with Sandman and Spidey in his emo-y black suit. The scene itself is a little bit more kind of like violent and aggressive than some of the other stuff, because that's where Spider-Man's character is at that point.
Leading Gabriel to suggest some violent additions of his own.
Stuff that I pitched kind of got in there, taking Sandman's head and grinding it down against the subway car and stuff like that.
Gabriel might have got a little carried away, though.
I remember pitching something that was too much for Sam in a meeting, and him just being like, oh no, that's gross, that's terrible, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, you directed Evil Dead. What? How could this thing that I'm coming up with be that bad?
But when it came to his ideas about Venom, Gabriel was not heaven sent.
The biggest challenge was getting Sam to talk about Venom. I would wait to try to talk to him about this Venom stuff all day long. Venom was not a character that Sam liked, and not a character that he wanted to deal with particularly.
Meanwhile, the production was also dealing with a changing of the guard in several key roles. With assistant director Lisa Satriano unavailable, it was time for her brother Nick to step up from his usual second AD position.
I wanted my brother to start first AD, and I thought it was a perfect opportunity.
It was probably one of the bigger movies I had done. It's all in the preparation, you know, going over all the storyboards and previs and breaking down the script and all the scouting.
So, thanks to his sister, Nick now found himself in Sam Raimi's inner circle.
Sam gets a hold of the guys that he likes, and he tries to keep them close as possible because he has a lot of the same crew. I think that transition was, you know, seamless.
One thing that hadn't been seamless, on Spider-Man 2 at least, was the creative tussle between composer Danny Elfman and the director Sam Raimi.
Because he wanted him to imitate another musician, which was Christopher Young.
So for Spider-Man 3, Danny Elfman was out, and Christopher Young would handle the score exclusively, as long as he then tried to emulate Danny Elfman.
The mission at the beginning was to embrace the language that had already been established. And because I was doing the whole score, I had to be cognizant of what he'd done in the previous films.
His directive to create a score that was the same but different would be a challenge.
Do your own thing within the corral of what had been done.
How that would turn out, only time would tell. Another equally important change in crew was in the VFX department.
John Dykstra, who won an Academy Award for Spider-Man 2, would not be returning for Spider-Man 3.
They didn't want me. Just kidding. There was a conflict between projects. I said Scott could do a really good job.
Scott Stockdike, who had been working with John Dykstra in Spider-Man 2, would now be stepping up to the plate.
Okay.
All by himself for Spider-Man 3. It was a big move.
I've sufficiently recovered from 2.
And a whole new set of problems was waiting for him on 3.
I kind of had a hint of the challenges. We were challenged by artistic choices, computation power, compositing issues, rendering issues.
Scott had big boots to fill.
I said Scott could do a really good job for you.
And he was filling them with sand.
So we studied sand. Everywhere I went, I'd collect different samples of sand from all over the world. We learned certain things about how sand, it shakes, like bigger pieces rise to the top and smaller pieces go to the bottom. We learned about sand, like in sand dunes, it will settle to a certain angle. It can't ever be past a certain steepness because it collapses on itself. So we grounded ourselves in the physics.
When it came to Venom, at least, the lion's share of that work was planned to be done by puppet master Steve Johnson, who'd been responsible for Doc Ock in Spider-Man 2.
Because Spider-Man 2 went so well, I was indeed called in by Jim and Sam, and we were hired. We wanted to do something really interesting and stuff that had never been seen before on the screen. And we worked for probably 6 months. We did test after test, triple layered things with tendons that would really state-of-the-art stuff. We made suits that at the push of a button could go from normal size to just pump them up, just filling these bladders with air.
And although Steve thought he was working with Sam Raimi's vision, the puppet master soon found that someone else was pulling the strings.
Interesting thing about the way Sam works is that he leans on Jim Atchison, his wardrobe designer, to do a lot of things that typically would not fall into the wardrobe design department. So we really certainly answered to Sam, but we also answered to Jim.
And after several months of development on Venom, Jim had some bad news for Steve.
Jim came by my studio, and Jim fired me.
Although Steve wasn't entirely sure why.
I think Jim probably felt that he couldn't control me as much as, but I was working with the same team, working with the same kind of general guidelines as we did on the first one.
And adding insult to injury, Jim took someone from his own costume department, a fabricator named Shoney Smith,
and set him up in a studio in downtown LA, and that's how they did the Venom character.
The prosthetics and costume would remain practically made. The majority of Venom's time on screen would be digital.
We did a little bit of stuff with Venom for Sam. Sam called us in and we built some puppet stuff, but it was very, very minuscule. We ended up building more of a skeleton puppet. We shot it, and I think Scott replaced most of it, but Sam wanted to have a puppet for Toby to work with.
And as Sam always says,
the kids want to see the puppets.
Well, in Spider-Man 3, nobody was seeing the puppets. And as for Shoney Smith, who replaced Steve Johnson running effects for the movie, well, his story ended in a rather unlikely place.
This kid that ran the studio got in all kinds of trouble. He was living a lifestyle. He couldn't maintain the studio, and he had this beautiful house. He started robbing banks. Well, it's not funny, it's tragic, but he only got 10 years, and that was like 5 or 6 years ago, so he'll be out soon.
Of course, the one question still lingering in Steve's mind.
The thing is, he comes from the makeup effects world. He could have easily worn a disguise. He didn't.
Sorry, fellas.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable.
But the production's main problem was still Venom, who was now primarily a CGI character. That meant even more work for Scott Stockdike and his team.
Venom is a challenge because he's in so many forms, and he's also beloved by fans. You have to work with somebody in a suit, but their face needs to be alien. They need to be able to, transform. They need to exist as goo. So we really had trouble cracking what that look should be, and we even had, chicken feet with goo covering them on little things, and we would look at it and be like, does this look scary enough or menacing enough? It was harder than I thought it would be.
Meanwhile, for Sam, there was an even bigger, darker villain than Venom to deal with: the script.
They realized they were struggling to get even a decent screenplay for Spider-Man 3, let alone worrying about trying to shoot 3 and 4 back to back.
And delaying shooting was not an option.
When you circled the release date, it was almost set in stone, and moving it became really complicated because of the marketing elements. Or also, you didn't want to compete against another film that maybe took over a different weekend.
Plans to film the two movies concurrently were abruptly scrapped, focusing all attention on just the one film, Spider-Man 3, which began filming in January 2006.
One of the first things we shot was Sandman coming out of a truck filled with sand. One of the things Sam loves to do is throw things at his actors, from behind camera, debris and sand. What we had for Sandman was sets that had sand piles on them, but anytime the sand had to move, it didn't really work that well. wide city shot. We had fans there try to blow some stuff, but it had to be digital.
The man playing Sandman, though, seemed to be made out of rock.
Thomas Hayden did a bunch of his own stunts.
And when it came to those stunts, Thomas Hayden wasn't pulling any punches, quite literally.
And he thought it was a soft wall, and it was a brick, and he broke his hand. I know Thomas, he gets zoned in, and he just starts doing Thomas, and he probably just thought it was softer than it was.
And things only got worse from there.
He had a huge allergic reaction. I got called down to his trailer. I opened the door and went, whoa. He's like, is it that bad? I'm like,
Thomas Hayden's broken hand didn't seem to slow down production. His allergic reaction, though, was a different story.
his lips swelled up. Not only was it noticeable, it was grotesque. He was unrecognizable. So I know there was a 2 or 3 day delay, and we were supposed to use him at that point, and we couldn't. You couldn't hide it with makeup or anything.
Thomas Hayden's issues aside, production on Spider-Man 3 continued. And for Scott and the visual effects team, the workload was relentless.
I definitely slept on my couch for a long time at work. There wasn't always a target for us to hit, just because conceptually it was very amorphous. I remember the bell tower scene being really difficult to pull off.
Not only was the bell tower scene technically challenging, it also had the highest fan expectations.
That sequence is directly lifted from the pages of the comics.
They used shots and they used stories that were from Amazing Spider-Man 300, that is considered the origin of Venom.
I think it was, for us, visual effects-wise, about getting really, really great performances, tracking what the bodies were doing in those performances, and then painstakingly adding on layers on top of what the actors were doing.
Everything involving Venom closely watched by Avi Arad.
Definitely felt Marvel's presence. I felt Avi was in there for any pre-production meeting that I was in, costume meetings. He was always in discussions and giving notes. He was definitely in many of our visual effects discussions. You could tell that he was processing and really taking everything in.
One of the biggest sequences of the film, a crane ripping through Gwen Stacy's office, was a particularly big undertaking.
And we had a big practical effects of this thing coming and chopping right through the building. That obviously was a one-take thing.
Well, until it wasn't.
We actually had to do a second take of, we didn't rebuild the whole thing, but we did it for the second half because the first time the crane arm didn't go all the way through.
With the release date for the film getting closer and closer, time was of the essence, requiring crews to work around the clock.
There was the main unit that was going all day long, and then as soon as they would wrap, second unit would step in, and we'd work all the way till 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning, and then first unit would come back in. We had 2 or 3 other units going, 2 at night and 3 during the day, which was crazy just because we had to, meet the deadlines.
And while it's possible to break the crews into shifts, it was still just one scene, and you needed the same actors for both crews. The solution?
Twins.
That's right. Every background performer in the crane sequence was a twin.
Imagine how hard it was to gather up that many sets of twins. That would drive any casting director crazy.
Production then shifted to New York to shoot all the major exterior shots of the sequence.
The hardest stuff was going to be in New York just because of, the environment, the atmosphere, locking down the streets, the time that we had to do it.
In the middle of 6th Avenue, a lot going on. We were dropping some big, heavy stuff on the street. We had trusses that were dropping things on people. There's a subway that you got to watch out for. We had that car that got squished, which is basically a 1,500 or 1,800 pound steel plate. And then the car built in such a way that it bent like a beer can when you step on it. So it wasn't just we were flattening the car, they wanted the car to do something. It was something that took us a couple weeks to put together.
Then, in the middle of filming, Avi Arad dropped a bombshell on Marvel.
Avi Arad, the CEO, he quits, leaves over creative disagreements.
And start his own company and do his own creative.
But if Sam Raimi thought Avi Arad was now a thing of his past, he'd need to think again. because Avi Arad, with his new production company, would still have his hands all over Spider-Man.
Avi Arad now in charge of that Sony Spider-Verse, producing and heavily involved in developing projects in that villain world.
Villains like Venom.
I recall him being around all the time, especially on first unit, putting in his 2 cents when needed.
As shooting continued, it became apparent that not having a script locked down beforehand was coming back to spider-bite them on the backside.
As we were going along, we realized that there was so much footage that this could be a 3 or 4 hour movie.
Despite a ballooning amount of footage, shooting continued unabated. The film's finale, under considerable pressure due to, well, lack of a finale.
The initial shooting of Final Battle wasn't figured out.
I'm gonna get you out of this.
It went from Mary Jane stuck up in a web to Gwen stuck in the cab, and then back and forth a few times. Like, none of this was ever really figured out very well.
Which damsel in distress they were gonna use? Would it be MJ or Gwen Stacy? And in the end, they went with MJ, because why would Harry help Spider-Man save Gwen?
I think maybe this got away from everybody a little bit.
And problems with the ending didn't end there.
Kirsten in the taxi falling, that set caught fire in real life.
30 feet up in the air.
Dealing with, the overall fall, the weight of that taxi and our stunt person that was in there. We had to scramble to get out of there to put the fire out. Especially as an AD, safety is one of our biggest things, and you always want to make sure that everyone goes home to their family.
Of all things, it was James Franco's hoverboard that made life just that little bit easier.
I thought it was a great transition from, the glider in Spider-Man 1 to the hoverboard. It wasn't easy to maneuver that glider just because it was so big and bulky. The hoverboard, you put, the stuntman on the middle with a pick, and it was a lot easier to maneuver the hoverboard.
Production wrapped in July 2006, and as editing of the film got underway,
editorially, there was a lot of work that was done. Sam making the different storylines work.
Because there was so much footage, they cut some scenes out.
It was a struggle to get all those pieces to fit together.
Despite having shot so much,
there were just elements of it that they didn't get.
Attempts were made to rectify the problem.
Lots of reshoots.
Which fell to Nick.
Because when first unit finishes, they want the cheaper, less expensive unit to keep going.
So while Nick and the team may have been slightly cheaper, the cost of failure for Sony would be far too great. Pressure that composer Christopher Young was taking in stride.
I can remember thinking, this was okay. And I remember Sam really liking it.
But studio executives wanted to make some changes.
The only thing you can really change at that moment is the music.
And the composer writing it. The score for Spider-Man 3 was nearing completion, but composer Christopher Young was about to face the music.
What happened is that at the sort of towards the end there of post-production, there was this feeling that the film was dissimilar from the two films before it. When they're at the very end, it's like, what can we do? The only thing you can really change at that moment is the music. It was decided in order to bring it closer to the previous films that some of my stuff in it should be replaced by Danny's stuff. I didn't know that was happening, but it did. So that was a studio musical decision.
With the film's release date only months away and post-production nearly complete, Sony tried to take the film to the third dimension.
Sony did try to push 3D on Raimi, and that is one element that he pushed back on significantly.
To do the first one in 2D and the second one in 2D and the third one in 3D is really more of a gimmick.
In fact, over the years, making the third film in a franchise 3D had become a bona fide Hollywood tradition.
Raimi knows that it is essentially cheapening the image that you're putting forward and stealing some attention away from it just for the purpose of being able to charge extra for a ticket.
I would not have been in favor of it.
So he was adamant against putting 3D on Spider-Man 3, even though Sony pushed him really hard to make it part of the presentation.
May 4th, 2007, Spider-Man 3 was released in theaters, where fans packed in to see Venom go toe-to-toe with Spider-Man.
Never wound,
what you can't kill.
Avi was correct. It sold a ton of tickets. And the fact that Venom is in that movie is partly a big reason why the film made $890 million worldwide.
But it wasn't all good news.
The word of mouth on it is not positive.
I think it was the most expensive movie ever made at the time, and I feel like a lot more of that could have been on screen.
Then, of course, there was the matter of adapting Venom.
Like, what? That's as big as he's gonna get? I'm like, oh man.
Topher Grace as Venom, it's bad prosthetics that look very cheap as they cling to his face. It's bad fake teeth that they put in.
Peter Parker's emo transformation not going down much better.
You've got, Peter Parker dancing like a real doofus kind of through the streets of New York. It was just a little goofy.
Well, I think he was supposed to act cringy.
The emo conflicted Spider-Man it's emo conflicted Sam.
It was an interesting choice. I don't know if I was in the room, I would have gone there, but they don't have to get my approval for any of it.
The director himself was also not happy with the film.
It didn't work out exactly the way Sam wasn't happy with what it looked like.
It made a lot of money, but everyone felt creatively it was kind of a missed opportunity.
With Sony eager to make Spider-Man 4, Sam signed on with the goal of getting Spider-Man 4 back on track, with one condition.
Sam came back expressly with the understanding that, look, I want to make this right. I want to do what I want to do. I've made you guys billions of dollars, and I feel like I've earned the deference. Trust me, I know what I'm doing.
Development on the fourth Spider-Man film began in 2008.
I think he wanted to go out on a high note instead of something with an asterisk next to it.
Jeffrey was now working for Sam on Spider-Man 4 as a storyboard artist.
So Sam comes in with this big box of action figures, and he's got Vulture and Spider-Man, and he's pantomiming them, fighting, and we're gonna do this, we're gonna do this. And I kind of burst into spontaneous laughter. I was like, what fucking alternate reality did I wake up in where this is my job, where I'm sitting in Sam Raimi's office playing action figures, working on Spider-Man. It's crazy.
Jeffrey soon found the need to reach out to Sam for more than just a paycheck.
So a couple months after I started the job was the anniversary of my brother's death. And they were gonna have a charity auction and a concert. And I went to Sam and I told him about it, and he was like, what do you need? And I was like, well, I don't need anything. I just need the time off. And he's like, no, what do you need? And I wasn't getting it. I was like, I don't need anything. I just need the time. And he's like, I know you're a fan, and I know it's your brother and your family, so whatever you need. And he gave me a big hug, and he's like, I'll see you when you're back.
Sam loaded Jeffrey up with a bunch of unique Spider-Man posters and DVDs.
So at the auction, this dad bought a DVD set and some posters for his kid. And I think the kid was 12, 13 years old, and he was a huge Spider-Man fan. And I think he was an aspiring filmmaker too, because he had a little camera, he was filming stuff. The dad was obviously super supportive of him.
On Jeffrey's return, after recounting the story to Sam.
So he gets down on his hands and knees, right? And he's signing everything. And not just with a signature, he's writing notes. So he's like, remember you can do whatever you want and be whatever you want to be. And then he'd go poster to poster in the DVDs, you be good to your mom and dad and all that kind of stuff. This guy's got everybody coming at him. He's responsible for $250 million, and that he would take the time out of all that to do that for me.
As development on Spider-Man 4 continued, Sam Raimi was able to work unshackled for the first time since Spider-Man 2. But for how long was the question. Spider-Man 4 was starting to come together.
So there was a script, and essentially the Vulture was the main villain. And I worked on this kind of climactic battle between Vulture and Spider-Man at the top of the City Court building in New York. And the B story was that the Daily Bugle gets bought by this corporate conglomerate who kind of TMZs the Daily Bugle. And then you realize the publishing magnate who takes over the Bugle is actually the Vulture's daughter.
Jeffrey was on such good terms with Sam, he piped up with a few story ideas of his own.
One of the narrative threads was that Mary Jane's gone and Peter's personal life is so out of whack that Aunt May's dating life is actually more on track than Peter's. I'd pitched this thing with either Stan Lee or Bruce Campbell being Aunt May's booty call boyfriend, and Peter has to come over and talk to him, and they're wearing a towel and everything. He didn't go for it, but I just thought Bruce Campbell would have been the greatest thing ever.
groovy.
So that didn't really work out. But I had pitched this thing about at the end of this montage where Spider-Man's taken out all of his lower level villains, where he takes Mysterio and leads him to the police. So all the cops are clapping, and he's, you know, hey, how you doing? Hey, good to see you, because now he's Spider-Man. And he pushes Mysterio up against the counter, and his big fishbowl comes off, and it turns around, and it's Bruce Campbell, and he scowls. That's gonna hurt! He's like, I'll get you, Spider-Man! I just think that would have been so much fun.
Raimi was having so much fun, he even started considering casting.
And we kept hearing about Malkovich. And then we started seeing Malkovich in like the concept art and the armatures and the sculptures.
Do you know how easily I could kill you, Frank?
When that guy turns it on, it's just blood curdling.
So you show me some goddamn respect!
Angelina Jolie was considered to play the Vulture's daughter.
And the Vulture's mogul daughter was only the start, as after 3 films of dudes punching each other and damsels screaming in distress, Spider-Man 4 would give the women of the Spider-Verse their due.
Anne Hathaway, I think, would have played the Black Cat.
That would be interesting because Black Cat was sort of a professional romantic interest of Spider-Man.
But she wasn't the only actress Sam Raimi was considering for the series' first female superhero.
So Kate Beckinsale had come in a few times, and she did her thing, and then she came out, and then Sam came out and was like this. And he's like, man, she was just too good.
But despite all signs pointing towards Spider-Man 4, something wasn't quite right.
I just don't think they could land on a version of the script where they all felt like, oh yeah, we feel good enough about this to pull the trigger and spend $200 million on this. And that's not the kind of thing where you want to commit to taking that kind of budget if you're not 110%. It's a lot of responsibility, it's a lot of money, and there's a lot of people's welfare at stake. And if you can't, you're better off not doing it.
So in January 2010, Sam Raimi makes it official. He eventually realized it was time to pass the baton.
So, yeah, I think it's to Sam's credit that he listened to his heart, he listened to his instincts, and, you know, I mean, that takes a lot of balls and heart to come to that conclusion on your own.
All of a sudden, we just got the call that things were shut down, and we had to call all those animators and tell them that they weren't coming.
With Raimi's departure, it finally seemed like the perfect time for Sony to reboot the franchise, wiping the slate and the big salaries of its stars clean.
Because they knew that they had a cash cow and they weren't necessarily ready to kill it.
And not only that, Sony's frenemy and biggest competitor, Marvel Studios, was making headway in the superhero movie market, as their most recent release, Iron Man, was a huge success. The MCU was beginning to take off, and the clock was ticking for Sony, in more ways than one.
Sony's right agreement with Marvel is that they are required to make a new Spider-Man movie every 5 years. They can't just sit on the rights of Spider-Man and not produce a movie. If they were to do that, then the rights would revert back to Marvel. So it's a case of whether they're ready or not, they need to make a Spider-Man movie.